Strange, yet true stories. Stories from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. Glitches in time. Reality is a mysterious thing. From the beginning of time, people have reported accidentally slipping into pockets of time where events would repeat themselves or alter in some way. For some time now, certain physicists have speculated that we are actually living in a dimensional simulated program, much like the movie The Matrix. Are we only experiencing one reality, or are we constantly going between dimensions all the time without noticing? Here are 12 true submitted stories that will have you questioning the nature of reality. 1. Baby monitor time warp. As usual, the long workday was coming to an end, and I was dutifully putting the last load of laundered clothes away in our bedroom when I heard a ruckus on the baby monitor just a few feet away from me. I thought it strange when I knew my husband and toddler were both in the living room quietly watching TV as my 2-year-old drifted silently off to sleep curled in my husband's lap as he caught the evening news. The bedroom door was straight in front of me, and I could see all the way down the hall to my husband and son in the lazy boy chair as this ruckus over the monitor continued. It didn't take long for me to realize the sounds were very familiar. Earlier in the day, I was in my toddler's bedroom, putting a load of folded clothes into the drawers and picked up some stray toys and books that weren't being played with at the time. As I was doing so, I was telling my son about the story of Jack and the Beanstalk for the first time. Now, I stood in disbelief as I heard the drawers being pulled open and shut, and rustling of the toys and books being put into the proper places. But I nearly fainted when I heard my son's voice over the monitor. I kept looking back and forth at my husband and now sleeping son in the chair in the living room, and the monitor sitting on my dresser that was literally replaying the specific events from earlier in the day. The monitor is a standard baby monitor bought from Walmart and is not a recorder, but instead monitors the sounds coming from the room as they are happening at present time only. I listened as my voice retold the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, and listened with familiarity as my son responded in baby talk to the tale he had never heard before. The incredible part was this all happened 5 hours earlier on the same day. I quickly called my husband into the room as he listened to the last part of the story with my voice coming through the monitor and our son's coos and chuckles. He stood stunned and turned his head and looked at our sleeping son flopped peacefully over his shoulder. In disbelief, he asked, "How in the hell?" as his voice drifted off trying not to miss a thing. I just stared at him in the same disbelief, and we both just shook our heads. This has never happened before or since, and became pretty clear from the beginning that we were listening to some kind of warp in time. I never imagined in a million years that I would be witness to it, and must admit, if it should happen to you, it is indeed one of the most incredible moments you can ever experience. 2. In the winter of 2009, my brother and I took a road trip from Portland, Oregon to Port St. Lucie, Florida, and back again. We made the trip to visit my sister who lives in Port St. Lucie. She and her husband just had their first child, and my brother and I were excited to see the newborn. On the trip to Port St. Lucie, we took a combination of freeways from the northwest all the way down to the southeast corner, basically a diagonal route. But several times throughout our voyage, we were tremendously delayed by snow. The trip, which should have taken no more than 3 days, ended up taking 5. Because of this delay, we had to cut short our visit with our sister's family. On the trip back to Portland, we decided to take I-10 the entire way. This stretch of freeway runs all the way from Florida to Los Angeles and would completely keep us away from the snow. The I-10 route added several hundred miles, but we both needed to be home for work the following Monday, and this was a surefire way not to be delayed. The first day of the return trip was uneventful, but we did manage to drive 1,300 miles from Port St. Lucie to San Antonio before stopping for the night. The plan was to make it all the way to Las Vegas the next night, which would leave us with about a 14-hour final day drive. The trip was going well. It wasn't until we left San Antonio that the glitches started happening. The car we took on this trip was a 2008 Honda Civic Hybrid. The entire trip we had been getting right around 35 miles per gallon. So we had become very aware of how many miles we could squeeze out of a tank. We knew to refuel around 350 miles or so. But we also knew we could stretch that number into the low 400s if we needed to. About 100 miles outside San Antonio, I noticed the fuel gauge was dropping noticeably faster than usual. So I clicked the button to change the dashboard display, only to see the car was getting barely 26 miles per gallon. At first I was shocked, but I reasoned it to possibly driving uphill the entire way. I still don't know. I thought throughout the course of an entire tank of fuel that it would eventually balance itself out and we would finish the tank within that 35 mile per gallon range. I was wrong. I kept a very detailed log of this entire trip, and this one stop in Fort Stockton, Texas, is the only anomaly in the entire book. The car, which had consistently held around 35 miles per gallon, suddenly finished an entire tank off at 25.8 miles per gallon. That's over a 100-mile difference in the vehicle's normal range. I still to this day cannot figure out why there was such a drastic shift in fuel consumption in that 300-mile stretch from San Antonio. But this story is not about miles per gallon and a wonky fuel gauge. I've reflected on that tank of gas several times since this happened, and I have almost come to the conclusion that it was an intentional glitch in order to make us pull over where we did. Our original plan was to refuel about 50 miles later in a town that I can't remember, but we obviously ran short on fuel. Anyway, with our GPS programmed to Las Vegas, we headed back onto the road in which the GPS directed. Pretty soon after we got back on the road, we realized we were no longer on I-10 heading west. Instead, we were north on Highway 285. We didn't think much about being off the interstate because many times throughout the drive, we had been directed onto bypass highways. We assumed this was just another such instance. After about an hour and a half of driving on Highway 285, we crossed into New Mexico, which was about 2 hours earlier than we should have crossed the border. By this time, we realized the GPS thought this was a more efficient way to go to Vegas, even though by all accounts, it is about an hour faster if we had stayed on the 10. We were annoyed, but decided to just stick it out with the GPS and keep heading north through New Mexico. Nearly 5 hours after refueling in Fort Stockton, my brother and I were hungry and decided it was time to find somewhere to eat. Driving through this part of New Mexico is kind of lonely. There are very few towns, and where there are towns, they are small and on the verge of becoming ghosts. I think their economies are built around helping travelers fill up their gas tanks. Other than that, I can't see a reason for them to exist. My brother and I have talked about what happened next so many times, but we still cannot figure it all out. We passed through a small town with a couple of gas stations, and we know the town was named Vaughn, New Mexico, and then about 20 miles later we drove through a town called Encino, which did not have a gas station, at least that we can recall. In fact, the second town didn't really seem to have much there, if anything. I wasn't sure if anyone was living there. I seem to remember questioning why it existed in the first place, but then quickly dismissed it and drove right through. Not even 10 miles after passing through Encino, we surprisingly came upon a city or a town that wasn't loaded in the GPS. This wasn't a big deal because I was using a cheap handheld that lost its signal all the time, but usually the only things it didn't display were newly built roads and recent construction areas. This city was definitely not brand new, so I figured the GPS was being buggy. The oddest part of finding this city, neither of us remember seeing any warning we were coming up on a town of this size. It had several fast food joints, restaurants, hotels, motels, grocery store, maybe an Albertsons, and even some bars. If I were to guess, I would say this city was roughly 10 to 20,000 people. We decided to pull off and grab a bite to eat. Normally, we probably would have grabbed some fast food, but my brother saw a Ruby Tuesdays and really wanted to go there. We had a couple of Ruby Tuesdays around the Portland area at the time, We had never been there, but we decided to give it a try. We had heard they had a pretty good salad bar, and I guess my brother was in the mood for something other than fast food. I went along with the suggestion because I was sick of eating junk. For the rest of the story, I will be Nick, and my brother will be George. We pulled into the Ruby Tuesday's parking lot, got out of the car, and walked in the restaurant. Immediately upon entering, a waitress who was milling around the hostess station says, "Oh my word, is that Nick and George?" Both my brother and I answered that it was indeed us, and the waitress went on to ask how life was in Portland. Suddenly it clicked. This girl knows who we are, but we are over 1,000 miles from home. Did we know her from back home? My brother and I both gave very basic, vague answers to her question, and I could tell she was kind of unsettled that my brother and I were being evasive. When we were seated, my brother immediately asked me where we knew her from, which was the same question I was going to ask him. I told him that I had no idea who she was and that she obviously had mistaken us with some other people. Not more than a minute later, this guy, bartender, comes up and says, "No friggin' way! George and Nick! You back for jobs?" What? My brother went on to tell the guy they had us mistaken with some other people. He laughed and dismissed my brother's response as a joke. The bartender continued on seamlessly and started asking us how we fared in the 3-month anatomy and physiology course we had taken at Oregon State. I remember thinking all of a sudden, this is not a coincidence anymore. My brother and I had taken a 3-month 15-credit A&P class at Portland State University when we were in our early 20s. We were late 20s when this interaction happened. Finally, I asked the guy exactly where they knew us from, and he just kind of paused and started looking me over. Then he said, "Oh, damn, you guys look just really similar to some people that used to work here." He apologized and claimed he had to get back to work. After a bit, our food came, and my brother and I noticed they had switched out our waitresses from the girl who recognized us when we walked in. That wasn't a big deal, although a bit strange. Next, a guy who I can only guess was the manager starts walking over to our table with a big smile on his face. As he gets within about 10 feet of us, he kind of starts looking over my head and stops. I think someone behind me was directing him not to talk to us. After he received the message, he sharply turned 90 degrees and walked away without saying a word. This had quickly become the most awkward meal of our lives. It went from people acting like it was a celebration for us to have shown up to everyone avoiding eye contact with us at all cost. After we finished up with our meals, the waitress came and told us that the cash registers were frozen and that our meal was on the house. I really wanted to ask the waitress what the name of the city was that we were in, but I also really wanted to get out of there. After leaving the restaurant, we were running pretty low on gas, so I decided to refuel before we got back on the highway. I assumed the name of the city would be printed on the receipt. We were not that lucky. This city strip was a one-way road on the eastern side of the highway. When we left Ruby Tuesdays, the only way to turn was right, and it headed straight back to northbound 285. In order to refuel, I would have to head north on the one-way street and turn right on a side street to head back to the southern part of town to the gas station. The only available right-hand turn off that one-way street was closed, so I was forced back onto the highway without fueling up. About 20 minutes later, we found a truck stop at the intersection of 285 and I-40, where we finally filled up. The rest of the trip was very ordinary. We talked at length about how weird that Ruby Tuesdays was in the middle of New Mexico. We came up with solutions about how we had doppelgangers with the same names. We joked about how people that look similar follow the exact same paths in life regardless of their upbringing. We talked ourselves into it being a major coincidence. When we finally got back to Portland, we decided to do a little research and find out the name of this town. We know we refueled at a truck stop at the intersection of 285 and I-40, which means that we had to have passed through Vaughn and Encino, so there should be a city between the truck stop and Encino. I don't see anywhere on the regular map or the satellite map where this little city could possibly be. We have never really been able to answer what happened that day. I can still vividly remember the waitress's face of unease by the way my brother and I were behaving. The bartender's voice changed when he figured out we were not the people he thought we were, and thinking the manager looked identical to the actor Ken Moreno. My brother and I know this stuff happened, but we have never been able to find out the solution. Maybe somebody can give us an answer, or maybe this was just a glitch. Maybe someone has driven that stretch of road and knows the town. Apparently, my brother and I worked at a Ruby Tuesdays in the middle of New Mexico. 3. Time glitch on a London street. My most powerful experience is a really strange one, and if it hadn't happened to two friends at the same time, I might even doubt it myself now. The three of us were walking through London from Camden Town down toward Mornington Crescent. We stopped to wait at a pedestrian crossing for the lights to change. The unusual plain green silhouette of a man walking for go, and plain red silhouette of a man standing for don't go, in case yours are different. As usual, when waiting for the lights to change, we all watched them impatiently. Eventually they changed, and we started crossing, keeping an eye on them to make sure we had time to make it across comfortably. Some of those crossings in London are a bit rough. About halfway across the road, there was, quite literally, a ripple in reality, a brief flash of disturbance. I looked up, and the lights had changed again, but not back to red. Suddenly, the plain green guy was wearing flares and glasses, had long, flowing hair cascading out behind him, and was surrounded by stars. Astonished, we stopped and exchanged glances. One of the others said, "Did you?" We both replied, "Yes," before he could finish the sentence. Not wanting to get killed, we finished crossing the road and then waited, looking nervously at the lights for them to go red again. Sure enough, the red guy had changed too. He was now carrying a briefcase, smoking a pipe with wisps of smoke rising, wearing a little Homburg hat, and he had big brogues on his feet. We stared at the lights for a while, but eventually continued on, feeling very confused. I mentioned this to a friend a couple of days later. She told me that she'd seen an article in the press talking about how the council had changed the plates over on the signs to mourn the death of a singer who had been famous in the 60s and who had lived in that street. She promised to bring me the article to have a look at the next time we met, which was about 2 weeks later. The council changing the plates makes sense. They almost certainly didn't change them in less than a blink of an eye, though. I went back a few days later to look at them more closely. The construction was standard. They were just normal plates of black-dyed glass, based on the original template of the walk/go men, but with extra details etched out on them to provide the outfits. The plates were bolted in and took up the entire casing. There was no mechanism by which they could have slid down in front of the other plates or anything similar. To be absolutely sure, I hung around looking at them from a cafe across the road for about an hour, but they stayed changed. A week after that, I went back again for another look, to get a sketch. The lights were back to being perfectly normal. A couple of days later, it was the meeting again. When I spoke to the girl who had known about the singer, she looked at me blankly. Neither she nor anyone else had any memory of me mentioning changing lights, singers, or Camden before. No knowledge of any article. Nothing at all about any commemorations. It still feels to me like a brief swap into a closely aligned parallel dimension. 4. Every day when I get home from school, I always enter the front door and carry on through the den and then into the kitchen to get a snack. This day in particular, it was a Tuesday, and every Tuesday I get home to find my dog waiting for me. 99% of the time on Tuesdays, no one is home when I get back, so I was expecting to find my dog chilling in the lounge as soon as I got back. As I walked into the den, I see Otto's green ball on the floor, so I kicked it over the sofa into his cage, which sits against the wall behind the sofa. Whenever I get back, Otto was always in his cage, and this time he was nowhere to be seen. I checked all over the house. Otto can't get upstairs due to a little baby gate we have at the bottom of the stairs, and just assumed that my mom and sister have taken him out for the day. The last thing I checked before sitting down to get on with my homework was the cage once more, which he was not in. After about half an hour, my mom and sister get home, and I hear them both greeting Otto and his collar jingling. Upon hearing this, I jump up and ask why they are greeting him if he's been out with them all day. They tell me he was locked in his cage the whole time, and ask why I didn't let him out. I have no idea how the dog turned up in that cage because I am 100% certain he was not there when I checked. I have zero explanation for this bizarre occurrence. 5. But my son is in bed. I'm a young mother. I have a 4-year-old. He just turned 4 and started this preschool program where he goes for half the day and then comes home. So from 7:30 to 12:30, he's at school. This day in particular has stuck in my brain, and I have even asked my son about it multiple times. But him being 6, you can never really tell if he is agreeing or suggestively agreeing. This day started like any other, except I had the day off from work. My husband works nights, so that way he can get our son from school at noon. I get home at 4:30, and he leaves for work around 6. I'm rambling because this memory is just so strange to me. I had the day off, woke up at 8 a.m., asked my son if he wanted to stay home with me instead of going to school. He absolutely agreed. So I was getting him dressed for the day at home, a red t-shirt and some sweatpants. We went downstairs to eat some breakfast. I got him a bowl of cereal, and he ate it while I was cleaning up around the house. After he finished with his bowl, he put it in the sink. There still was a little bit of cereal in it. Anyways, fast forward a couple of hours to about 10 o'clock. He's playing with his toys, and I had just finished a load of laundry. I realized I ran out of dryer sheets, so we get dressed to go to the store to pick up a few items. I specifically, and still to this day, have the toy he decided to buy from the store. It's in my closet because of just how strange this whole ordeal is. We get some lunch while we are out. Then we get home and it's nap time. I let him sleep in the sweatpants and red t-shirt. He's laying down and it's about 11:30 now. I decided to go lay down on the couch and watch a little TV. I drifted off to sleep. I woke up to my phone ringing. I reached over to where it would be on the couch, and it's like the couch wouldn't end. I woke up. I was in my bed. First of all, not that weird that I could walk upstairs half asleep and get into my bed, right? I answered the phone. It's my son's school. They asked when I was going to come get my son, as the preschool program was over. I blatantly stuttered. What do you mean? Tommy is home today. She then said, No, he's here. Are you okay? Please come get him. The school program is over. So I kind of pushed it off to not make myself sound like a complete idiot. I told the lady I would come get him. I instinctively went into my son's room, and guess what? He's not there. I freaked out for a second and thought maybe I was dreaming after all. I went downstairs, put my shoes on, and realized that the TV was on. I usually turn it off. Maybe one time I didn't, but no big deal. Here's where it gets super strange, and I still can't wrap my head around it. I drove to my son's school to pick him up. He's in jeans and a white t-shirt. I grab his backpack. We head home. I get home and start to try to do some laundry. I went upstairs to grab my son's hamper, and I noticed the toy I allegedly dreamed about buying in the store in his bed. I walked downstairs to start the laundry, and there is a load in the washer. It's a few clothes, but on top is the red shirt and gray sweatpants I had put him in my dream. I specifically remember grabbing them out of his clean clothes drawer. What's even weirder is that I went to get a dryer sheet, and the box had never been opened, like it was brand new. At this point, I'm really tripping out. I haven't really asked my son if I'm crazy and delusional. The thing that sent shivers up my spine was the fact that my son's half-eaten cereal bowl was still in the kitchen sink. Did I dream my son's existence for a day? Or did I just completely glitch from one day to the next? I don't remember dropping him off at school. My husband doesn't get home until after 8 a.m., so no way he could have dropped him off. I tried to find the text of me telling my husband I was keeping our son home from school that day and not to swing by his school to get him. I couldn't find it. I'm just so paranoid now that this will happen again to me. I explained it to my husband, but of course he didn't believe me at all and tried to make me seem like I was joking. 6. This happened in November 2016. Me and my fiancé live around Piedmont Park in Atlanta. We've lived there for years and have gone running and walking. We've gone to concerts, festivals, the farmer's market, hundreds of times. We were walking from the other side of the park from seeing the Arrival at nearby Midtown Arts Cinema, and it was after dark. From across the park we see lights we've never seen before. What is that? Are they getting ready for a concert or a festival or something? We thought maybe they'd put up a temporary structure for some upcoming event, so we walked over to check it out. It was a permanent brick structure, partially built into the side of a hill with a picnic table area on top and a public restroom in the bottom. The building is aged to look like it's been here since the 1980s. The lights were 2 huge street lights aimed at the building. It's at the main 12th Street entrance to the left side of the walkway across from the main event building that overlooks the duck pond. We had never seen it before. I'm convinced it's because it wasn't there before. Neither of us remember it being there. It's right behind where the Saturday farmer's market is every weekend. I've literally been through there hundreds of times. I'd know if there was a public restroom right there. I checked Google Maps, and it's listed there, public restrooms. This was one of the weirdest things I or my fiancé have ever experienced, but I'm oddly calm and indifferent when I think about it. How can something so big just magically appear, just wisp itself into existence, and more people not freak out about it? Does anyone else remember this building being there? How can both of us have no memory of it? 7. I'm very, very confused about what I saw recently. I live in a neighborhood in a big city. Not a downtown-looking area, but a neighborhood where every street is lined with houses and shops. Not really the place where creepy things happen. One night last week I was hungry and took a late-night trip to Taco Bell around 1 a.m. This night was unusually foggy, which is extremely rare for the area. I could only clearly see about 50 feet in front of me. I got my food and was on my way home. Despite the fog, it was a pretty chill night with almost no other cars on the road. About a minute later, I'm coming up towards an intersection of a small side street, and I see what looks like a big wavering garbage can or tree on the sidewalk. I couldn't make it out very well as I was approaching due to the fog, and I think to myself, that dude looks creepy. I get closer to it and did a double take with a huge, scared shock going through my body. It was what looked like a slender, pitch-black figure with either a shovel or pitchfork, making extremely odd, jerking motions with his object toward the ground. I said out loud, "What the heck did I just see?" to myself. It disappeared in the fog behind me as I was driving, and I didn't want to turn around to drive past it again. I just thought, whatever, and kept driving. The next thing I noticed gave me the worst shock of anxiety and panic I've ever felt. On the next street up, I saw an intersection that I thought was strange, because I didn't remember seeing so many shops in this spot before. As I drove past the light, I see the Taco Bell sign to my left. I was on the street where I started. That was impossible. The route to the Taco Bell is literally a straight shot on the main street from the street I live on. I don't make any turns until I get to my street. I couldn't have gotten turned around somewhere. It was definitely not a different one, as I instantly recognized the same characteristics and began to recognize the street names as I drove past. I know I didn't accidentally go to a different one further up. I specifically remembered the drive-thru lady I regularly see when I go there. I didn't remember specifically what corner I saw the strange figure on earlier, but I didn't notice anything as I made my way home. I'm really weirded out by this and haven't stopped thinking about it. I don't have any history of hallucinations or time lapses, and I've been afraid to tell anyone about it. Is there any reasonable explanation for what happened to me? Or did I experience a real glitch? 8. This happened about a year or two ago, and I still vividly remember it because of how weird it was. So one day I'm walking home from school, and I was walking down the main street towards the side street that we live on. Suddenly, I saw a red Suzuki that looked exactly like my mom's red Suzuki drive past me down to the end of the main street and turn onto our street. Now, sometimes my mom would arrive home from wherever she was at roughly the same time as me, and if she saw me walking home, she would stop and give me a lift the rest of the way. This time, she didn't stop. I didn't think much of it. She probably just didn't notice me. Not a minute later, I saw my mom in her red Suzuki drive past me, see me, and stop just ahead to pick me up. At this point, I was all like, but I was still looking down towards the end of the main street to try and spot the other Suzuki. Why? Our street is a dead end. If it would have taken a wrong turn, it would have had to come back the way it came. And I had been watching the entrance to our street the whole time and hadn't seen it come back out. Now, as far as I'm aware, no one on our small, short street has the exact same model of car as my mom. So I thought, maybe a friend is visiting someone on our street and they've parked around the corner. We turned the corner. Nothing. No sign of it. I looked down every driveway as we passed. Nothing. Gone. Disappeared into thin air. I may never find out exactly what happened that day, but I like to think that somehow an alternate timeline temporarily leaked into ours. And in that timeline, the only difference was my mom didn't notice me walking home. 9. I very vividly remember being 7 years old and having my mom tell me she would go grocery shopping for like an hour or two, so she was going to leave me home by myself. This was one of the first times that I was left home alone, so I was a little nervous. I followed her to the door and waved goodbye, then watched her get into the car and leave. Then a couple of seconds later, as I started heading up to my bedroom, I heard the doorbell go off. I looked out the little windows beside the door, and there she was, just a couple of seconds later, with about 4 heavy plastic bags on her hands. My mom. I opened the door up, confused as ever. My first instinct was to tell her, "How did you get here so early? You just left." To which she responded with, "It's been 2 hours. You must have fallen asleep or something." Which I had not. Last time I mentioned it to her was a couple of years ago, and she had no memory of it. 10. I was 16, and I was working for a moving company. We were in downtown Louisville, Kentucky, and were just finishing up an office move. We maybe had a couple of hours left to go. The whole crew decided to grab a bite to eat before we finished up the job. My friend and I were in charge of taking the old furniture to the basement for a cleanup the next day, where we would take unwanted items to our warehouse. We got to the basement, dropped off what we had in our hands, and decided to go upstairs and walk to 4th Street to meet the guys, about a block away. When we walked back up the stairs, we did not recognize anything we had seen all day. All we saw were more stairs and a long hallway. We took the hallway, and it led us to another stairwell. We had no choice but to go down those stairs. We went down the stairs only to be met with the same hallway. We decided to retrace our steps and went back to the basement. We were on the other side of the basement and saw that most of the stuff we placed there all day was on the wrong side, and there was a lot more of it. We then proceeded to go back up the stairs we took 100 times that day, and a door led us outside. We look at our watches, and we've lost 30 or 40 minutes. We were surprised to walk out and realize we were a few blocks away from where we were working from. Took us 15 or so minutes to get to 4th Street, where the rest of the crew were just ordering and congratulating themselves on a job well done. After the meal, the supervisor told everyone to do a last sweep around the offices for personal items and trash. Once we did, everyone was piling in the trucks. We were apparently finished with the job. It was at that point that we came to the realization that although we thought we only lost 30 to 40 minutes, time went through 3 hours and they finished the job without us. We lost 3 hours worth of work and transported a few blocks away, even across several streets, because of this glitch. 11. So, my parents and I slept in the living room because it's very cold and our fireplace is there. They slept on the big couch and I slept on the smaller one. My dad's alarm clock woke me up, and as they were getting ready to go to work, I was on my phone. My dad left first. Then my mom got up, and we drank coffee together. She got ready and left about a half an hour later. I went to the bathroom, and when I got back in the living room, my mom was sleeping, and she woke up 2 to 3 minutes later and started getting ready for work. 12. On the afternoon of September 23, 1880, on a farm just a few miles outside of Gallatin, Tennessee, a remarkable event was witnessed by 5 people. The farm was occupied by farmer David Lang and his family, his wife Emma, his 2 children, 8-year-old George and 11-year-old Sarah, and their household servant. On that afternoon, the children were playing in the front yard when Mr. and Mrs. Lang came out of their house and Mr. Lang started to cross the pasture toward his quarter horses. As Mr. Lang was crossing the pasture, the horse and buggy of the family's friend, Judge August Peck, came into view on the lane in front of the house. The children stopped playing, as Peck always brought them presents when he visited. Both Mr. and Mrs. Lang saw the buggy, and Mr. Lang waved to the judge as he turned to walk back towards the house. Then, David Lang completely disappeared in mid-step. Fully witnessed by his 2 children, his wife, Judge August Peck, and the judge's traveling companion, the judge's brother-in-law, David Lang had just suddenly ceased to exist. Understandably, Mrs. Lang screamed. All 5 witnesses ran to the spot they had last seen Mr. Lang, but there was nothing to hide behind or under. The field contained just grass. The adults quickly searched the field to no effect. By this time, Mrs. Lang was becoming hysterical and was taken back into the house as neighbors were called with an alarm bell. By nightfall, all the neighbors were involved in the search, and by lantern they checked every foot of the field, stamping their feet to try to detect any holes that Mr. Lang might have fallen into. Nothing was found. In the following weeks, Mrs. Lang was bedridden with shock. All the family servants, except the cook, Suki, left, and curiosity seekers were chased away from the farm by the local authorities. The county surveyor confirmed that the field was on perfectly solid ground with no caves or sinkholes. Months after the occurrence, in 1881, Lang's children noticed that the grass at the site of their father's disappearance had grown strange and yellow and formed a circle with a 15-foot diameter. Sarah called to her father, and seemingly as a result, both the children heard him faintly calling for help, over and over, until his voice faded away. Mrs. Lang never fully recovered, and there was never a funeral or memorial service for Mr. Lang. Mrs. Lang eventually left the farm and allowed Judge Peck to rent it out, with the exception of the field in the front of the house. That pasture was left untouched as long as she lived. In these 12 strange yet true stories, there's proof that the world is an unusual place, filled with many quirks and glitches. If you have any strange stories that you would like to share, send them to strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com. That's strangebutTrueStories and the number 2@gmail.com. I'm Steve White. Until next time.